Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, Austria. Welcome, Europe, to this further edition of our Europe Week debate marathon. I'm very, very grateful that today we have an absolute highlight of this series. Paul Schmidt and I are happy to welcome two champions of European economic and industrial policy. Austrian Minister Margarete Schamberg, who is joining us here from Vienna, and EU Industrial Policy and Internal Market Commissioner Thierry Breton, who is of French nationality and is joining us from Brussels, where he's just coming out of the meeting of commissioners. I would like to say a few words about both of you. I think you don't need a lot of further introduction, but I think you have both something in common. You're both economic politicians who actually know what you're talking about, because you both have been in the private sector as CEOs of companies. Therefore, you bring a lot of experience into the public sector and probably an experience and an understanding of the economy that we need in these times, particularly after being affected by the corona crisis. I'm happy to welcome you here today with Paul Schmidt, the Secretary General of the Austrian Society for European Politics in Europe Week. And we will engage with you now in a number of questions, and then we will also take some questions that we are receiving via the social media. And Paul, you have the first question.
Yes, thank you very much, Martin. Let me also welcome you, Minister Schamberg and Commissioner Breton, to our EU talk today. It is an honor for us. Thank you for joining us. Before we get into the nitty-gritty details of our discussion, can I just start with a personal question? How do you actually, maybe I would start with Minister Schamberg, how do you live through these demanding times? What are your personal experience with the situation?
Well, thank you first for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here, especially with Thierry Breton. So I'm very happy that I can join you on this session. For me personally, I can remember the day when I first realized that this coronavirus came into our lives or into our world, and at that time it was still far away in China. But my parents are around 80 years old, so my father is having his 80th birthday this summer, and we had expected to celebrate and to have a big party with him. And then I suddenly saw this virus coming up, and I already at that point had a very strong negative feeling about it, and thought, what would happen to the health of our people in Europe? Also, will it come to Europe or will it not come? And therefore, I was very early aware of this. And second thought, of course, was already, what does it mean for the people working in Europe, for all those people in the companies? And this is how I first saw the virus, and we saw it then coming up to Europe. So this is something which has accompanied me since then, and of course, like all of us, I hope very much for finding medicine or something to protect us from this virus for the future. But at the moment, we are of course all inside this crisis, still in this crisis, so we tend to forget about it because it's getting better and better, especially in Austria. But still, we need to be careful both for the health of people, but also, of course, for the economic side. Both is not one against the other, but it is as important to stay healthy as it is also to have a good life and to have jobs.
Mr. Breton, how do you do in these difficult times?
Well, first, like every one of us, no one was expecting to live in his life a crisis of this magnitude. No one. Even if, Martin, you mentioned that I had a previous life in business, even if I was also Minister of Finance before, and I know pretty well China. I have been, by the way, in my previous life, one of the first one to install, it was in the late 90. The first factory is in the Pearl River, Detroit, between Shenzhen and Guangzhou, and I had at that time many factories. I was running a big consumer electronic company, so I know China very well. And to tell you the truth, when we start to see the first signal of what was happening in China. Early January, I came to see Ursula von der Leyen in her office, and I say, President, what's happening is important. It's important for China, it's important for the world. We know that unfortunately, we had also this kind of crisis in the past. And I think it's important that somebody is coming to China. So I said, I volunteer. And I said, maybe it would be a good idea if somebody from the Commission comes to China. I said, oh, it's a good idea. And then, unfortunately, Martin, I wasn't able to go because I had some restrictions. You know the Commission probably better than I do. And when restrictions are put in the Commission, they're extremely tough, and especially for a new Commission like me. So I wasn't able to come, and I regret, because I know that at this time it's important to send the signal which are necessary. And then, of course, after we saw the pandemic, and we saw the pandemic coming in Europe, and yes, we started to realize when we saw what was happening in Italy, the magnitude of it, and now, of course, I'm like Margaret. I have only my father, but he's 97, Margaret.
Okay.
But he's extremely well. He's a scientist, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to come to see him. But for the first time, for the past 2 months almost, but for the first time, finally, wearing the right PPE. I've been able to see him last week, so it's fine. And my daughter lives in Berlin with my grandchildren, so I cannot see them. My other daughter lives in London, I cannot see them. My son lives in Lausanne, in Switzerland, I cannot see him. But hopefully we'll be able to be again together. But like every family, I mean, we had to stay home and not to see each other. Hopefully, within the next few weeks, we'll be able to see each other again. But we all know that we will have to live for many more months with the virus, and to be extremely cautious. It's absolutely not over. We know that it's not over.
Thank you to both for sharing this with our audience. I think it is useful to know that everybody in Europe is suffering under this crisis, is affected by it. And of course, from Vienna here, all the best of wishes to your parents, Mrs. Schamberg and Mr. Breton. I think we are all as concerned about our parents, and I think it's important that we keep that in mind in all this big politics that, of course, has to be dealt with in parallel. You both are, in addition to being human beings, experienced business people and ministers, and now commissioner, very, very well aware of the economic situation. Mr. Breton, you come this morning out of the video conference with the commissioners, where the spring forecast has been discussed and announced, and we see, of course, something that we see on the health side. All of Europe is dramatically affected by the health crisis, but also economically. We have a true symmetric shock, and I think for the audience, I repeat the figures that the European Union is expected to shrink in its GDP by 7.4% this year. This is much bigger than any other crisis that we had before. Austria is on the slightly better side, but minus 5.5% are not a moment of joy for anybody. And we have some countries in Europe who are shrinking even by 9 or almost 10%. So this is a big crisis without any doubt. It is not caused by anybody. And I wanted to ask both of you how you, as experienced economic politicians with a background in the private and public sector, what is your first reaction? What we Europeans should do now in this crisis? What are the first 2 things that we Europeans need to do together to get out of this crisis? Because this is a big crisis. We need political intervention. So what would you like Europe to do in these days? Perhaps, Mr. Breton, we start with you as you come right out of the Commission meeting. And then we have Mrs. Schamberg, who tells us how Austria can support your efforts.
No, you're right, Martin. We had these figures to be released today, and obviously that's just an estimation. Could be worse. We don't know yet. You know that the ECB is forecasting between 5 to minus 5 to minus 12. So I mean, we have to be cautious. We have to be cautious. But you're absolutely right. It is the worst recession ever that we are coping with now in Europe since we are together in Europe after World War II. So that's really an extremely dramatic situation that we have to cope with. What is the first thing I expected? I worked immediately, and just wanted to tell you, immediately when we started to see this. You know, I'm in charge of the internal market, and of course the internal market is pretty well integrated, which is something that we did over the past decades. It's a big plus for us in Europe. And of course, my first reaction was to try to evaluate, to anticipate what will be the impact. And of course, the impact will be absolutely huge in many of our ecosystems: tourism, culture, automotive industry, aircraft. Many of our industrial ecosystem are extremely strongly limited. And my first reaction was to you know, I've been a former CEO. You said that. I've been also a former entrepreneur, and I know that in this very situation, the thing that we have to take care is liquidity. So we are in a huge liquidity crisis now, and we need to again to maintain our economical ecosystem alive. And that's why it's pretty strange, you know, because in my life I have been probably, as a Minister of Finance in my country, the one who privatized probably the most of any other finance minister, because I saw that the state had at that time nothing to do with companies. So I privatized a lot when I was Minister of Finance. And now today, it's a totally reverse situation. I'm encouraging all our member states to act immediately. And as you know, the Commission immediately released, of course, the Maastricht criteria. Of course, it was hopefully it was already planned in the treaty. So we get rid of it, and then we encourage also the member states to be able to intervene, including in companies, including with direct grants or even taking equity positions. And I think it's extremely important that we all do this immediately, again, to maintain our ecosystem alive, and also to maintain a level playing field between us in Europe. So we need to do this on a sort of equal basis. It's extremely important. All our ecosystems are fully integrated, and also regarding what's happening outside of Europe, in the US or in China, where the US, for example, now a huge recovery plan has been put in place, 2.2 plus 3, it's almost $2.3 trillion, and we need to do the same thing at the US. I'm fighting for that. We need probably to have a plan of this magnitude in order to be able to maintain again our ecosystems and also the level playing field between us and between our main partners / competitors, US and China. So we are working now for this recovery plan and fund, and of course I'm pushing for being able to have the kind of magnitude that others are doing.
Thank you, Mr. Breton. Mr. Schramberg, 5.5% reduction of Austrian GDP because of the corona crisis is, of course, on the one side, because we give public health the priority, as the Austrian government, as all European governments have done, and I think this is very important. And I think all human beings in Europe are grateful for these approaches, but on the other side, a big economic loss. What would you want Europe and our member states to do together now in the coming months to get out of this crisis sooner rather than later?
Yes, what is important, it's a world economic crisis. So we can see this in the figures which have just been published, that it's hitting the countries in Europe, but also outside Europe, also China and also the US. If we look at the Austrian figures, we are on minus 5.5%. So only Luxembourg and Poland are better than us. So what it seems somehow is that if you have rather strict rules on the health side, you can be lucky. We do not know yet altogether, but you can start the recovery a little bit earlier, and you can then have all the measures to secure both liquidity, as has already been mentioned by the Commissioner, and on the other hand side, jobs. And for jobs we have created something very special, which is a specialized short-time work program, which has functioned very well, and the companies have adopted it. So what we can see is that if we also ask ourselves, there's some people asking, is it health versus economy? I think it's both. We need to make sure that we take care of the people and have as many measures taken to have as few dead people as possible, and on the other side to recover as quickly as possible. And now we are in this recovery phase, we are in this comeback phase in Austria. We're preparing ourselves and we want to be ready within the next 2 weeks, so end of next week, beginning of the week after. We are talking a lot to experts, to companies, to social representatives, because none of us had this experience before. So what we need to collect is the best ideas to get out of this crisis, and these are local ideas and also European ideas. If I look to the European side, it is important. If I look what we would need and what the companies tell me is to re-establish the single European market, because this is something, the borders are an important topic at the moment, and it's not only for the transfer of goods but also for the transfer of people. So what we would need is the establishing of some sort of European rule. It cannot be on a bilateral basis, but we need, based on health standards, to establish rules which say, okay, if you achieve these health standards in your country, then we can re-establish the 4 freedoms inside the European Union. And I think this is something which companies tell me what they urgently would need. A second topic is, we have initiated this, I've initiated this together with the Minister of Finance in Austria, is the reform of the EU state aid rules, because now we have seen very good and quick reactions. However, we can be even better and do even better. And this is what we intend by asking for a reform. And this reform for us should come earlier than 2033. So this is also something very concrete in the direction of Margrethe Vestager, also to say that we need this reform. I give you concrete examples. I have companies, there is a limit of 800,000 euro in these reforms, and we would need 2 million euro. This comes from the practical side. You've said I was a CEO, as Thierry was for many years, and for 15 years, and these companies give me the feedback, and we see we would have to increase the limit. Also that we have a softer definition for undertakings in difficulties, because I have companies which we have to reject. These companies are searching for medicine, a medicine for the coronavirus, and they are not fulfilling the first topic, like 50% of consumption of their capital, and we had to reject them, but they would be very important for the research part. So this is also something very concrete. And then I'm very convinced that competition law and procurement law, we need to have a look in this phase. Both are very challenging parts. How can we secure the European companies from unfriendly takeovers? And second, how can European procurement law assist the companies? So it's not always needed to take money. Of course, we need a lot of money to establish liquidity, and we have a package of 38 billion euro for the Austrian companies. But at the same time, there are topics where European Union and the Commission could help us, which is not always money. And this is competition law, this is procurement law, this is the rules for EU state aid. And these are topics which can be taken very quickly, I guess.
Thank you, Minister. So there are a lot of topics on the table to discuss. On a small footnote, and for organizational reasons, just let me remind the viewers that if you out there want to ask a question, please send us your comments or questions via social medias, and we try to integrate them into the discussion. Mr. Commissioner, a lot of issues on the table. Maybe you could start by telling us what is the situation with re-establishing the single market? What is the situation on the national borders? Where are we at the moment? And then I think Madam Minister took up two issues which I'd want to respond to. The one issue was, will we be able to define this situation? So in order to have a level playing field within the single market, and what about the reform of state aid rules and competition and procurement regulations? The floor is yours.
Okay. I'm sorry. It was. I didn't listen very well all your questions because we had some network problems. But I tried to answer what I understood. First, of course, what is extremely important is, as you said, to establish as soon as possible a single market. We just need to understand, and I know that everybody is aware of it, but even if we're starting now every single member state in this so-called phase 2, the confinement phase, the virus is still here, and obviously for the following months, if not semesters, we will have to cope with it, and it will not be a normal situation. And that's why, again, we started, by the way, with tourism. Tourism is extremely important for a lot of countries, extremely important for Austria, but for a lot of countries in Europe. Tourism is one of our most important ecosystem. It's almost 19 million jobs. 3.5 million companies, 90% of them, more than 90% of them, being less than 10 employees, and of course, zero revenue for the past month and a half, and a lot of questions for. So yes, we need liquidity. We need liquidity to help them to cope with the situation, and of course, we need also to give some clarifications. So we work now at the level of the Commission to make sure that we can establish some guidelines, rules, or toolbox. We develop now this concept of toolbox. We try to put in this toolbox the kind of guidelines which are important. First, to have a harmonized way or let's say coordinated way to cross border with the same kind of rules. Same thing for social distancing, where we will be able to reopen some of these facilities. It could be restaurants, could be hotels, could be a resort or whatever. And of course, we need to understand also that we will not be to reopen everywhere, because of course it's depending on the pandemic. And by the way, the evolution of the pandemic does not match with our natural border within the EU. So, including within our countries, we will not be able to go everywhere the same way with the same kind of rules. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we will have the same kind of rules for the basic, let's say, guidance that we will apply to this sector, including to give security for the tourists. If you want to go to, hopefully we will be able to go in summer back to some hotels within our own countries, but also hopefully, and we are working hard for this elsewhere in Europe. Outside of Europe, maybe a little more complex, we all know that. But within Europe, we hope to be able to do it. We'll present this toolbox next week. We are working extremely hard to do this. It could be also being able to use tracing apps, being able to use these apps crossing borders. That's also something that we are working hard. We had digital and telecommunication ministers meeting yesterday, and we are pushing to have the same. We have also a toolbox here that everybody will apply, but to have also the same kind of rules and apps, hopefully, to be able to trace on a voluntary basis, of course, the evolution of the pandemic. So we are working on many tools. We will make this public next week, again, on the most harmonized way possible. Again, it's in two sides. I insist on this. First, to make things more smooth, but also to create more safety. And when you will decide to go in a place, you will know that the rules will be the same everywhere in Europe, which will guarantee the safety which is needed, which will be needed for the following weeks or let's say months ahead of us. That's for the tourism. But of course, then for internal market, it's a very large subject. I insist on one thing, which is extremely important. We should not underestimate the fact that within the next few weeks, we will probably have to cope with a lot of bankruptcies in some of our countries if we don't act quickly. This is a reality. So we have to be extremely careful. This is why, again, I insist that member states should be able to help their ecosystem. Some don't have the fiscal space to do it. Then we need to do it. We need to help it. That's our interest. If you look like, for example, Germany is making more than 50% of their revenue outside of selling in Europe. For example, Netherlands is 70%. So everyone is benefiting from the internal market. We need to make sure that the internal market is not broken. Not only it's our responsibility, but also it's an interest of every single country. So my mission as a commissioner of internal market is to make sure that, of course, we can cross border again. Of course, we can start to travel. Of course, we have to make sure that, especially in Austria, some of the workers who are not Austrian could come back to work in many companies, including for construction companies. I know that this is an issue. We are helping it, but it's not the only thing. We need to make sure that we keep again the single market the way it is, to be able to rebound and to be ready for the recovery.
Thank you, Commissioner Breton, for the detailed answer. I think you addressed many of the points that were mentioned by Minister Schramberg as well. I noted that both of you mentioned the word level playing field and internal market, which I think shows that there's a lot of convergence. There was, however, over the last weeks, a little bit of a debate between Austria and the Commission on the state aid rules. If I understand you well, on both sides, this problem seems to have been solved for now, because all Austrian state aid schemes have been granted for now. But what we're looking now, if I understand you, Mrs. Schramberg, for a broader reform of state aid and competition law in the future to position Europe better. Is that, have I understood this correctly? Have we solved the slight misunderstandings between Brussels and Vienna? And are we now on track to work together for a stronger, more competitive joint system?
Well,
are there still open issues? Because I think even though Mrs. Vestager is not there, I'm sure Mr. Breton is also very informed.
Yes. Huh? Yes, but half and half. So what of course we have got the invitation for Margaret Vestager all for continuing talks and to continue the talks, and of course we will accept that. I'm very happy to talk with her about it. So yes, we have got approval for the existing tools, which inside the current possibilities we have handed in, and so we have got the approval. And this was quite fast, and this was quite good. However, what we found is, from the practice side, additional need and additional urgent need. I have given you the examples, for example, from 800 to 2 million. This is one of the examples, or also softening of the UID difficulties that companies have, because we have these special R&D companies who cannot fulfill the criteria and cannot therefore not search in it. Or, for example, SME guarantees should be, in my opinion, free of charge. So I think there is room for improvement, and we would need quick improvements, coming back like a rapid prototyping. I always call it, Thierry, it's like rapid prototyping. Yeah? We are in where we need to launch topics very quickly so that we can address 80% of the companies, and then we find out, aha, we have to adjust. And unlike old politics, we need to adapt very quickly because none of us has had this experience before. Last time it was during the crisis of the Spanish gripe, the Spanish flu, yeah? And none of us can have this experience, and therefore we do this rapid prototyping, we develop, and here are our concrete suggestions for this, and so we will be happy to continue the talks on this because I'm convinced it's there in other countries. So I've talked to Hungary, Germany and others who have the same topics, and doesn't mean that it has been incorrect so far, but it has been as it is to address a big amount of companies, and now we have to, in the rapid prototyping process, to adjust. And then secondly, we need a reform, in total reform, and this is now planned for 2023, which I understood, and my wish would be to take it earlier because it's one of the instruments which will help us a lot and is working quite well the moment it is established in a way that we need it from the practical side. And I think this is where we stand at the moment, so there is still disagreement on some part and agreement on others, and I think we will continue the discussions, not to discuss for discussion's sake, but to get the system evolving for the sake of the companies out there. And I know Thierry is in the boat for this, because we do have these companies out there, you have mentioned it, which we need to help. At the moment in Austria there is like a frozen time for bankruptcy. We do not see bankruptcy at the moment, as on the contrary, we see a big reduction of this, but it is like in a vacuum. Yeah, it is at the moment, it's a special situation, but it will come second half of the year and next year, and there we need to be there, and we still have time to react and to help, and this is what we are searching for.
Thank you, Minister, also for clarifying that this is an unprecedented crisis. Everybody is doing what they can to help to preserve jobs and companies, and I'm glad to see that there are good talks between Vienna and Brussels now, and that we are making progress. Of course, not everything is agreed yet, but at least there's progress, and I'm sure that also solutions to new and other problems will be found soon. I don't know if Commissioner Breton would like to add something to this aspect.
I know well Margaret, and I do everything I could to help, as you know, Margaret, and I will be always the one to push to do things more quickly, because you're right, in this crisis, it's also a time to review some of our rules, but we cannot wait. So if we have to review it, we better do it now, because we know that tomorrow will be too late. So I will be on your side, Margaret, to push as much as I can to make things happening quickly. But on the other hand, we have to be careful also to make sure that we maintain, I will say it again, a level playing field within the whole EU. Let me give you an example. Today, as we speak, and Germany put a fantastic plan. If I had been a Minister of Finance in Germany, this will never happen. But I will love to put the plan in place. 356 billion euros, voted, by the way, in less than 6 days in the Bundestag. So it shows that when it's needed, you can do things quickly in Germany. And that was important. But today, if we look at all the state aids which have been granted in the EU, more than half of it, more than 50%, just for Germany. And I think it's good, but we need to make sure that every single European country will be able to have the same access and to do it quickly also. So that's something that I have, of course, as a commissioner in charge of internal market, to make sure that we do this on an equal basis in order to avoid any problems for the future, where we could create counter-reaction, which will be bad for everyone. So that's why, again, I will help Margaret as much as I can to push for the reforms, but you could also count on me to make sure that everyone will have an equal access to what is needed.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Commissioner.
Can I add
yes,
something
please
to the tourism part, which you have mentioned, Thierry? You have talked about tourism before, and I just wanted to mention something about tourism, because it makes up 15% of Austrian GDP, and we have a lot of people working in tourism, as you have mentioned, in family business and small business, really small units. And so here it is important that we have also the support from the European Commission to find, as you have mentioned, common rules. So a framework of common rules for this summer and the next winter to come. I would like to ask also for this uniform, coordinated approach for the borders. Because on the one hand side, we have the goods moving, and we need to free these goods moving inside the European Union as one of the important topics. But on the other hand, it would be most important for tourism, especially for smaller countries, of course, to have clear rules. Health rule coming from the health side. So saying, for example, with this type of standards that you have, with this number of infections you have clear rules for the borders inside the European Union, especially for this tourism, so that we do not have to have these discussions on a bilateral basis. I think this is one of the sectors which I'm worried most about, even if I'm not directly responsible, but it's part of the Austrian economy and 15% of our GDP, and I know also from other countries, especially the smaller ones. So if I could suggest common criteria for this tourism and the crossing of borders, this would really help us all and avoid a lot of negative discussions that we have at the moment, especially for this field. So this is something I just wanted to reflect on what has been said on tourism before we move on.
Minister, you're making our job very easy today, because we don't have to bring up new issues, because you bring them up yourself, which is very good, because we have a lot of issues we want to talk about anyway. Mr. Commissioner, do you want to comment on the topic of tourism and the question of freedom of movement that the minister just mentioned?
No, I think I already mentioned it. We are working on it. We will issue our toolbox next week. And again, this is health and safety. It is mobility and cross-border. And I insist on the fact, and you're right, Margaret, to speak about cross-border, because we need to make sure that we can have the sort of same kind of rules or to cross-border. But I insist also on mobility, because in order to go there, of course, you may go by car, fine. If you go by train, then we will have to have the same rules in terms of social distancing. See, we are working on this too. For planes, of course, the same story. So you see, this is a very wide problem that we are working on. But I have good hope that we will be able to land with something which will be comprehensive and which will be hopefully helpful, even if at the end of the day, you know, like me, that what will be important is the decision of the health authorities, which will have to have the last word on where you will be able to go, how you will be able to go, including in Austria, if you still have some areas which are not yet totally quote unquote safe. Same thing, of course, everywhere in Europe. So we are handling all these different situations. But again, I hope you will be able to start to use the toolbox next week, and that it will be helpful for the tourist industry, because I'm like you know, it was the first ecosystem that I wanted to go public with, because I know the situation that all these small companies are coping with. By the way, we discussed, you and me, Margaret, on this subject many times together, and hopefully it will be helpful for them. But we have to be realistic also. I mean, if we can reopen, it will be fantastic. But the season will be extremely bad versus what it has been, of course. I just want to give you the figures that we are. Figures that for the whole tourism industry in Q2 will be maximum 10% of what, in revenue of what was achieved last year at the same quarter. And now we worked on a plan that I have here. Of course it's a plan, but we hope that maybe it will be a little bit better in Q3 and in Q4. But still, the revenue expecting in the whole industry will be probably, if everything is good, not more than 50% of what it has been last year. So I mean, this is where here again we need also to work on this package for the recovery fund. One side being liquidity and grants, the other side being allowing maybe loans, more long-term loans, to help also the tourism industry to reinvent itself. And this is why I convene a big meeting, a big forum, hopefully just after the summer, if we can convene again, together with all the key players of the tourism industry, to start to draw the first conclusion, if I may say so. We will still be, of course, in the crisis, but hopefully in a better situation or better shape than we are today. And of course, to start to think what about a more sustainable tourism, including more digital in it, taking in consideration the platforms, being more green. In other words, using the two digital trends that we highlighted when we presented the whole industrial strategy for Europe, more digital and of course more green, and how to see we could accelerate these trends and helping also the industry to benefit from it and to start to transform.
If I can just, for our audience, draw a line here, because I think there on the issue of tourism, we saw both of you favor a common European approach and, if possible, not bilateral solution, common criteria, how to progressively open to tourism where this is possible and reconcilable with the public health considerations, which must take precedence. And from that, I also take that you both see that this year there will be some tourism possible, but it will not go back to what we are used to from last year. Therefore, the importance of the third element that Commissioner Breton just mentioned, the recovery instrument, the recovery plan on which the Commission is working. Mr. Schamberg, if I can turn to you, because Mr. Breton and his colleagues are still working on the recovery instrument for next week and the links to the multi-annual financial framework. What is your expectation on tourism, but beyond that, how much money do we need to really recover Europe from a crisis of more than 7% of GDP shrinking this year, according to the estimates? It can, as Mr. Breton reminded us, be even bigger, up to 12 or 15%, as Christine Lagarde once said. How much money is needed, and where do we find this money for this Marshall Plan that we need after this unprecedented crisis? And what are your expectations to the Commission, to the EU institutions, and what is Austria ready to contribute to these efforts?
Well, it's difficult just to give one number, but I think it's a common effort which the European Commission can do, what can the countries do, what can the municipalities do, the cities, the smaller cities do, all across Europe. And I think here we have a shock on both sides. We have a shock on the demand side and a shock on the production side for the value chains. So we need to first to have this demand functioning again. So we will never have enough money to do everything for the economy, what is needed. So what we need to come first from this first step, where we give safety as a state. This is our role, and this is the role of the state, to give the safety to the companies, to get liquidity in the short term, to get the grants. But then now we need to do the frame conditions, and the conditions need to be there that the economy can restart and function itself, because there we can never do enough to re-establish everything, but it needs to be that we do the conditions, the frame conditions, that economy can also recover itself. And one important topic is demand. I'm very much convinced that we need to give impulse to demand, and this means, contrary to what others might think, tax cuts, tax reductions. We will need for the smaller and medium-sized income, and this is what we are planning to do in the short run, rather earlier than later, to reduce taxes for the income, so people have more in their pocket, more money available to spend. Because what is worrying me most is that we can see that people start, of course, not to consume, but start to put the money back. So we need to give them security, that there is enough money for them and that their jobs are secured. So that is these two topics, is demand stimulation. We will need a toolbox, as Thierry has correctly put, a toolbox for demand stimulation, and that might look different from country to country. For Austria, one of the toolbox will be a tax reduction for smaller and medium-sized incomes, very soon. Then the other side will be on the production side. So how do we have incentives for investments? And especially, we are talking a lot with experts, what is the right time for these investments? So for these incentives for investments. They might not be needed now, immediately now, but we need to work them out quickly so that companies can rely on the fact that these incentives will come. So it's all about trust, both on the side of the consumers and both of the side of the companies producing either services or products or combined services and products. And so this is what we are working hard on, and there will be money necessary. In our first part was 38 billion for the immediate aid, and of course we will need additional money for the second part, for the comeback. This will be also a combination between what Europe can do and what we can do as a government and the municipalities can do. So we are working on that, and as on the Commission side, we feel the necessity to be very quick on that. So it will be available in the next 2 weeks already, so to give this security to businesses both and people in the business, so that we can save as many jobs as possible. Can we save all the jobs? No, we cannot save all the jobs, but we can get them back as quickly as possible in their normal lives, and this is what we are targeting for.
Mr. Commissioner, what can you tell us about the talks regarding the recovery fund, regarding the establishment of the recovery fund? You've mentioned before the importance of a level playing field. Now, you've also mentioned that the corona pandemic is a systemic shock. It is a shock that hits everyone, but not everyone has the same financial possibilities. We've just listened to the Austrian situation. Not everyone has the same financial leeway to get out of this situation. So how can the recovery fund make sure that actually help everyone, but help those who are even more in need than others, I would say? And where do you see the balance between loans and subsidies, for example? What is your reaction to what the Minister just said?
Yeah. First, I think Margaret presented a very coherent plan, and I think it's exactly what should be done. But what Margaret did not mention is that Austria has not the first euro available to finance all this plan. Austria will need to borrow it, right, Margaret?
Yes. Yeah,
And
like all the countries, yeah.
that's exactly where I wanted to go, like everyone. What is something extraordinary in this crisis is that, and I want to be very clear, not one single country has the first euro available to cope with the situation. Everyone will have to borrow, some will say to beg, to have the money to do it. No one has the first euro available. Everyone will need to borrow it. And that's something extremely new on the planet. Extremely new. By the way, including the US, of course. But extremely new. And of course, you have two things to look at it carefully. First, the past. And sorry to speak about myself, but when I've been a minister, I have been a strong advocate to make sure that we were maintaining the Maastricht criteria in my country. And we did when I was Minister of Finance, including for debt and including for deficit. But maybe the first time and the last time, but we did. And it was my mission and my job as a Minister of Finance to do it. Past is the past. Now, for the coronavirus situation, which will last what it will last, we just have to make sure that just for what is needed for the situation, everyone will need to have access to finance its own recovery plan, will be able to find the liquidity which will be necessary to do it. And I think it's just our job, our mission at the EU level to make sure that this will happen. And that's why we believe it's important, of course, to make sure that with the tools that the European Council asked us to work on, in other words, a recovery fund, because as you know, for the last European Council, member states asked President Charles Michel to task the Commission to try to evaluate what was needed at the level of the EU in terms of recovery fund, and also to propose a way to put this in place. It could be, as Martin mentioned, in the MFF, could be elsewhere. We are working now to see if we can put it in the MFF. But of course, the first task is to understand what is the magnitude of what is needed at the level of the EU. It's just a basic way of working. Before starting to speak about the tool, let's start to speak about the needs. And then the Council asked more precisely the Commission to work specifically sector per sector or industrial ecosystem per industrial ecosystem to try to evaluate what will be needed for the repair, quote-unquote, side of the fund, and what will be needed for the recovery part of the fund. Of course, for the repair, it will be probably more grants. For the recovery, probably more loans, or long-term loans. And I think that what is extremely important is now to finalize this evaluation, and we are in the process to do this, as requested by Member States and by the Council, and then, of course, to discuss together with Member States how to do this. But at the end of the day, I think we should look at this as an exercise to be able to put on the table the right tools for everyone to be able to have access to what is needed in their own countries, in their own ecosystems. Of course, with some conditionality. I think it's fair to have some conditionality, including, for example, for the recovery part. And personally, I'm advocating that for the recovery part, we will probably encourage as much as we can the three dimensions of the industrial strategy that we supported for Europe, the Green Deal, so everything which will be able to push, enhance the green transition will be important. The digitization, everything in the recovery plan which will be able to push and accelerate the digitization of industry will be important. And of course the resilience part, and the resilience part means probably to see if in some industries, some sectors, and we had a discussion with Margaret about antibiotics, Margaret, we may favor maybe to relocate some industry. Of course, not everything. We are not at all naive. We don't say that it's the end of globalization, which would be stupid. No, we just say that in the resilience part, or for some of our industries, it will be important to diversify the supply chain, probably, or to relocate some of our activities when it makes sense. And by the way, using the new evolution of our industrial strategy, more circular, and when we speak about circular industry, I mean, it means that our economy, it means that, of course, it will be more local, including for more industries where you could now add some more digital factories with 3D printers and everything, which will allow you now to relocate some activities of some part, including the fact that for the way our fellow citizens or companies may use the product produced by industries will be more look at pay-per-use than on ownership situation. And all these things will have to be put together to probably to accelerate and to enhance the recovery part with some conditionality.
Mr. Commissioner, a follow-up question. Do I understand you correctly that there will be no postponement of the Green Deal objectives? They won't be diluted? So when it comes to supporting investment, when it comes to financial support, be it loans or subsidies, the Green Deal will be at the core. And will there be ecological conditions to fulfill as well?
Again, I could easily say that yes, it will be no postponement at all. So the answer is yes. We will continue, of course, on this strategy, which is absolutely critical. It will be just tragic if we decided to postpone. So we will continue, of course, exactly on the trend we have announced. And by the way, when we are coping with a crisis of this magnitude, what history teaches us is that most of the time, in crisis of this magnitude amplify, accelerate the trends. So it will accelerate more green, being more conscious of what we are all together on the planet, the relation with us and the environment, our vulnerability, alone or together. So yes, Green Deal will be more important than ever. Yes, digitization, where now it's unbelievable. 4.5 billion human beings have been confined for 5, 6, 8 weeks. And of course, now everyone is even more familiar with all the tools that we know, Margaret and myself, because we are working in the same industry before, teleworking, e-learning, and of course, socializing through platforms and everything. And of course, it will be accelerated. And then, of course, resilience. You see all these debates today between the US and China. That's an important debate. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that this debate will be enhanced or accelerated, unfortunately, after the crisis. So yes, resilience will be even more important. So that's an acceleration. So the answer to your question is, of course, we will continue to not only to keep our objective, but also maybe to use, if I may say so, the crisis is not over yet, so we have to be cautious, but to use it to accelerate these trends, including, of course, in the Green Deal.
Mrs. Schamberg, we have a question here from Facebook addressed, I think, mainly to you. The question is, what is the future of the Austrian airline hour? Can the state do something to support it, and should it? I think the citizen from Lower Austria would like to know about the future of our, and I'm sure you can tell us as much as you can at this moment in time.
Yes, thank you. I will come back to this question, definitely. I had expected it today in the press conference, but was not there, it's here. But let me first have a few inputs also on a few things from my side added to what has been said so rightly by Thierry. First of all, he was mentioning the resilience of an economy. So we need to work together hard, together with the Commission, to get a stronger economy, more independent. And by more independent in Europe, I do not mean less globalization. It's not the one or other, but it is a new way of thinking about how we work and what we do in Europe. So what we have done so far in a very good way is in the R&D sector. So we have put a lot of money in there. But what we have unfortunately neglected, and we know this because we come from an economy, Thierry and myself, where this is an example which shows exactly what we have not done in the right way, what politics has not done in the right way in the last 15 years. So if we look at the IT and telecom sector, we can exactly see that we have lost a lot of companies in Europe. Taking a few examples, companies which I have worked for example, Alcatel and others, which just disappeared from the European and the global screen. So what we need is to add to the R&D the topic of manufacturing in Europe. It needs to be done in the healthcare sector and in other sectors. In the R&D intensive sectors, we also need to manufacture in Europe. And there we have an instrument which is not long here, but it is here since some time, and I think it has been excellently worked out also by the previous Commission. It is the IPSE, Important Project of Common European Interest. And here we have the tool. We have the tool in our hands, which we can put on the semiconductor, which we can put on the Wasserstoff, what's that in English? Wasserstoff, hydrogen. That's right. And what we also can now put in the healthcare sector for the production of medicine. So here also I have a wish, and one wish would be if we could further develop the IPSE to a very, very quick tool that we are here, and I know Thierry is working on that, and maybe also that not only the countries can put money inside, but also maybe we find a possibility for the European Commission to put money inside, also to have this co-investment alongside to say we want R&D and high-intensive digitalized R&D, but also digitalized production. And here I come to the Green Deal. When we talk about bringing production back into Europe, we talk about green production. We talk about highly automized, digitalized production. So I even dare to say that a ton of steel produced in Europe is, and for example in Austria with Föst, is adding to protecting the environment instead of producing it in China. So you have both, not there the transport, and second, you have this highly modernized way of production so that you can put this production inside like a city of Linz, where this production is taking place, and you have still high quality of living. So yes, we need the Green Deal also to be continued, and of course we need to take care of all the jobs that we need, because we need, if people do have a job, they can take care of the environment, and I think this is very high priorities. For the digitalization, I can agree to what Thierry has said. We also have three major topics. We take digitalization, Green Deal and education. I look at the time, and Austrian Airlines, I cannot say more than has been said so far.
I think we've started out the discussion with you, Madam Minister. Maybe the last word for the Commissioner.
And perhaps with a concrete question, Commissioner, that is arriving from a citizen here in Austria via Facebook, who is asking, will we get better as Europeans out of this crisis than the US and China? or will we lose out in the global competitive game after Corona? What is your optimistic or pessimistic view, Commissioner?
My optimistic view is that I think that after this crisis, one single word will jump in, and this word will be solidarity. We have seen within our own countries the unbelievable solidarities between the fellow citizens of all our countries, in Austria, in Italy, in France. At 8 o'clock at night, everyone in Europe applauding the one who were working like hell to try to do their best to support the one affected by this tragedy. We have seen solidarities within our own countries, with the one continue to work, even if most of the population was confined. Even if it was not the case at the beginning, we have seen some solidarities between us in Europe. After the first 2 weeks of everyone was so shocked that we had to cope with reactions, but then solidarity was here. I hope that we will see solidarities while working with the correct fund to make sure that everyone will have the same right of access to what is needed. But solidarity also between continents. I just remind you that when, coming back to your first question, when China was hit, they were lost. They asked for help. And we were here, Europe. We sent 56 tons of masks, PPE, gloves, ventilators, 250 million euros to help them in January, because they were not able to support themselves, the amputee. Then it came back. By the way, we have been watching carefully not to humiliate anyone. They were requesting us to do it without any cameras. We did it without any cameras. Solidarity also with Africa, that we know that Africa will need us. So in other words, my hope, but also what I forecast is that solidarity will become probably more important than ever. So if we recover all together with this world, we will be stronger together.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mrs. Schamberg, a last word on solidarity?
Well, I think what has shown us is that the people are working hard together to get back to their normal lives, and I give my full respect to everybody who's out there in the hospitals, but also in the smaller companies who are now recovering, taking care of the employees. And I think this is something which has shown in this time, and also that they are so innovative, that everybody is thinking of how to invent new topics, how to be able to get around this big crisis. It is still there, it's not yet over, and they all have my full support. We do all that we can to get the right frame conditions together, also with the European Commission, to help on a fair basis and on a basis that we can all together recover.
Minister Schramberg, Commissioner Breton, I think we've covered a lot of ground in 60 minutes, and I think one thing which is really important is that we're not alone on this planet, and that we have to think in wider terms and look across border. You've mentioned the concept of solidarity and of help, and we're not on an island, but we all depend on each other. So we'd rather find ways and new concepts to recover out of this crisis and to get stronger out of this crisis. I think that is one important lesson. Can I thank you very, very much for joining us here today? I think this is a very important, or the important contribution to our week of European debates here in Vienna, Austria. Thank you very much. My gratitude also to Martin for letting me co-chair this together with him. Stay well, and I think this will be continued. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to both of you. Thanks. Have a happy Europe Day on the 9th of May. Happy 25 years of Austria in the European Union, and we're looking forward to work together, sometimes with differences of opinion, for a stronger European Union after this crisis. Thank you, Mrs. Schramberg. Thank you, Commissioner Breton, and have a very good day and stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you. Merci. Vielen Dank.